You've probably been told that Harley Davidson never makes a bad-looking motorcycle. But what if I told you that the motor company has created some of the most hideous machines ever to roll off a production line? Motorcycles so ugly that dealerships couldn't give them away. Bikes so offensive to the eye that Harley enthusiasts pretend they never existed. In this video, we're revealing the 17 most hideous Harley Davidson motorcycles of all time, ranked by real rider reactions and forum discussions from thousands of disgusted owners. And trust me, the bikes that made this list will make you question everything you thought you knew about Harley design. From paint schemes that look like someone spilled industrial chemicals to proportions so wrong they resemble kitchen appliances more than motorcycles, these are the bikes that prove even legends can fail spectacularly. The number one most hideous Harley was so bad that only 23 examples survive to this day. Watch every second of this countdown, because this isn't just entertainment, it's a masterclass in how not to design a motorcycle. Ignore this, and you might end up buying one of these disasters yourself. Number 17, 2009 Triglide Ultra Classic. The Triglide Ultra Classic looks like someone took a beautiful touring bike and mated it with a city bus. This three-wheeler weighs over 900 pounds and has the aerodynamic properties of a brick wall. The engineering team clearly prioritized stability over aesthetics, but the result was a machine that destroyed Harley's sleek image. Riders nicknamed it the Whale because of its massive, ungainly proportions. The rear end is so bulky, it blocks your view of everything behind you. The two rear wheels create a stance so wide that parking becomes a geometric puzzle. Despite being marketed as practical for older riders or those with balance issues, most Harley enthusiasts saw it as an embarrassment to the brand. The design team clearly prioritized function over form, but they forgot that Harley riders buy with their eyes first. Forum discussions consistently mentioned how the bike looked handicapped or like a medical device. The touring capabilities were actually quite good, but the visual impact was so negative that it overshadowed any practical benefits. Sales were disappointing, and many units sat on dealer lots for months. Number 16, Street 500, 2015 to 2020. The Street 500 was Harley's attempt to capture younger riders with a budget-friendly option. Instead, they created something that looked more like a Honda Rebel than a real Harley. The bike featured cheap plastic components that felt hollow when you tapped them. Quality control issues plagued early models, with switches breaking and panels rattling loose. The proportions were all wrong: tiny tank, oversized seat, and wheels that looked borrowed from a scooter. The fuel tank held only 3.4 gallons, giving it a stubby, incomplete appearance. The seat was positioned too high relative to the tank, creating an awkward visual break in the bike's lines. Even the Harley Davidson badges looked out of place on such a generic platform. Forum discussions consistently described it as generic and uninspiring. One rider famously wrote that it looked like a Chinese knockoff of a Harley that someone forgot to finish designing. The bike was built in India to keep costs down, but riders could tell immediately that corners had been cut everywhere. Harley discontinued it after just 5 years, which tells you everything about how well it was received. The Street 500 proved that cutting costs doesn't work when your brand is built on premium craftsmanship and iconic styling. Number 15, 2022 Street Glide with envious green fade. Harley's paint department had a serious lapse in judgment with this one. The envious green fade color scheme was so bad that riders dubbed it Hideous Snot Green Camo. The fade effect looked like someone spilled green paint and tried to blend it with a dirty rag. The color transition was poorly executed, with harsh lines where there should have been smooth gradients. This wasn't just an unpopular color choice, it was actively offensive to look at. The green was too bright and artificial, resembling the color of antifreeze or cleaning chemicals. When sunlight hit the paint, it created an almost neon glow that hurt your eyes. The base Street Glide is actually a solid touring bike with good ergonomics and reliable performance, but this paint job made it impossible to take seriously. Harley enthusiasts flooded forums with jokes about how the bike looked like it was covered in algae or radioactive slime. One dealer reportedly said customers would walk past it quickly to avoid looking at it directly. Even dealerships struggled to move these units off their lots, often requiring significant discounts to find buyers. The few riders who did purchase them frequently had the bikes repainted within the first year of ownership. Number 14. 2021 Sportster S. The 2021 Sportster S represents everything wrong with modern Harley design philosophy. The fat, upswept exhaust pipes look like they were stolen from a different bike entirely. These pipes are so oversized they dominate the bike's visual profile, making everything else look disproportionately small. The chrome heat shields add unnecessary visual weight to an already cluttered design. The chopped rear fender gives it an unfinished appearance, like the design team ran out of time or money. Traditional Sportster fans hated how it abandoned the classic proportions they loved. The original Sportster had clean lines and purposeful simplicity, but this version looks busy and confused. The LED headlight is modern but clashes with the retro styling elements elsewhere on the bike. The bike sits too low in the rear and too high in the front, creating an awkward stance that screams, "trying too hard." The tank shape is angular where it should be curved, and curved where it should be angular. While some younger riders appreciated the modern approach and the improved performance from the new Revolution Max engine, longtime Harley enthusiasts felt betrayed by how far it strayed from the Sportster heritage that made the model legendary. Number 13. 2023 Street Bob in Industrial Yellow. Industrial yellow sounds like a color you'd find on construction equipment, and that's exactly how this Street Bob looked. The paint was so bright and jarring that riders said it hurt their eyes to look at directly. This wasn't a subtle yellow or a classic gold. This was the color of safety vests and road cones. The paint had a matte finish that somehow made the offensive color even more prominent. The Street Bob is normally a clean, understated bike that appeals to riders who want Harley heritage without excessive chrome or touring accessories. But this color scheme made it look like it belonged in a road crew fleet rather than a motorcycle enthusiast garage. The yellow clashed horribly with the black engine and frame components, creating a visual discord that was genuinely unpleasant. Forum members described feeling nauseated by the color. One rider famously said it looked like someone had covered a motorcycle in mustard and left it in the sun. Another compared it to a giant yellow highlighter. Dealers reported that customers would specifically request to see any Street Bob except the yellow one. The color was so unpopular that Harley quietly discontinued it after just one model year, making it an instant collectible for people with questionable taste. If you're enjoying this countdown of Harley's biggest design failures, make sure to subscribe for more motorcycle content that dives deep into what makes bikes legendary or laughable. Number 12. 2014 CVO Deluxe. The Custom Vehicle Operations Deluxe was supposed to be Harley's premium offering, showcasing the best of their design and engineering capabilities. But the 2014 model featured some questionable design choices that left buyers wondering where their $40,000 had gone. The most criticized element was the wagon wheel-style rim that looked like it belonged on a stagecoach rather than a modern motorcycle. These wheels were not only visually inappropriate, but also heavy and difficult to clean. The spokes collected road grime and required constant maintenance to look decent. The accessories were mismatched and clashed with the bike's nostalgic styling theme. Chrome accessories were mixed with black accents in ways that created visual confusion rather than purposeful contrast. For a bike that cost over $40,000, buyers expected flawless design execution and attention to detail. Instead, they got something that looked like a parts bin special assembled by committee. The paint schemes available were limited and uninspiring, failing to justify the premium price point. The poor sales numbers reflected exactly how the market felt about these design choices. Many CVO Deluxe models sat unsold for months, requiring dealer incentives to move inventory. Number 11. 1905, Model Number 1. Now we're getting into historically significant territory, but significance doesn't equal beauty. The 1905 Model Number 1 was essentially a bicycle with a small engine bolted on. It had no suspension, minimal braking capability, and looked like something a teenager might build in their garage during a weekend project. The single-cylinder engine produced just 4 horsepower and was mounted in the most basic way possible. The design was so primitive that modern eyes can barely recognize it as a motorcycle. The frame was basically a reinforced bicycle frame with minimal modifications. The fuel tank was tiny and positioned awkwardly high, making the whole machine look top-heavy and unstable. The leather belt drive was constantly slipping and required frequent adjustment. The engine was mounted in the most basic way possible, with crude brackets that looked temporary. The whole contraption looked ready to fall apart at any moment, and many of them did. The single brake was a simple spoon brake that pressed against the rear tire, providing minimal stopping power. While this bike represents the beginning of Harley Davidson's legacy, it also represents the beginning of their occasional design disasters. The crude construction and awkward proportions make it clear that even legends have humble and sometimes ugly beginnings. Number 10. 2001 VRod. The VRod was Harley's attempt to compete with modern sport bikes, but they created something that looked like it was designed by committee with too many conflicting opinions. The excessive chrome made it look like a rolling jewelry store rather than a serious performance machine. Every surface that could be chromed was chromed, creating a visual overload that hurt your eyes in bright sunlight. The retro-futuristic styling pleased nobody. Too modern for traditionalists, too retro for sport bike fans. The bike featured a water-cooled Porsche-derived engine that produced impressive power, but the styling was so polarizing that performance became secondary. The swooping lines were interrupted by unnecessary chrome accents that broke up what could have been clean, flowing bodywork. Harley purists called it a bling machine and criticized the water-cooled engine as un-Harley-like. Traditional Harley engines are air-cooled and produce a distinctive sound and feel that defines the brand experience. The VRod's engine was smooth and powerful, but lacked character. The bike sold poorly throughout its 16-year production run because it never found its target audience. Sport bike riders wanted something faster and more aggressive, while Harley traditionalists wanted something that looked and sounded like a real Harley. The VRod proved that you can't please everyone, and trying to do so often pleases no one. Number 9. 2014 Street 750. The Street 750 was Harley's global bike, designed to appeal to international markets where smaller displacement motorcycles are more common. Unfortunately, it looked like it was designed by people who had never seen a Harley Davidson before and were working from a vague description over the phone. The cheap plastic components felt hollow and fake, producing rattling sounds that betrayed the bike's budget construction. The proportions were all wrong, with a tank that looked too small and bodywork that resembled a scooter more than a motorcycle. The seat was positioned too high relative to the foot pegs, creating an uncomfortable riding position that looked awkward from the side. The exhaust system was undersized and produced a weak sound that embarrassed riders at traffic lights. The bike was targeted at younger riders who wanted an affordable Harley, but young riders still wanted something that looked like a real Harley. The Street 750 failed because it forgot that even entry-level Harleys need to capture the brand's essence. The build quality was inconsistent, with early models suffering from electrical problems and finish issues. Riders complained about paint chips, loose fasteners, and switches that felt cheap to operate. The bike was eventually discontinued in most markets due to poor sales and negative reviews. Number 8. 1973 to 1975 Z90. The Z90 was built on an Italian Aermacchi base, which should have been the first warning sign that this wasn't going to be a proper Harley. This two-stroke bike looked more like an electric bicycle than a Harley Davidson. The frame was thin and delicate, completely unlike the robust construction Harley was known for. The small fuel tank and minimal bodywork gave it a toy-like appearance that embarrassed adult riders. The weak, underpowered engine produced a pathetic whine instead of the rumble Harley riders expected. The two-stroke engine required oil mixing and frequent maintenance, alien concepts to Harley owners accustomed to simple, reliable V-twins. The styling was so generic that you could have put any manufacturer's badge on it and nobody would have noticed the difference. The bike was quickly phased out because it lacked any semblance of Harley's robust aesthetic or character. The suspension was basic and harsh, the brakes were inadequate, and the overall build quality was poor by Harley standards. Forum discussions from the era show that even budget-conscious riders preferred to save up for a real Harley rather than settle for this imposter. The few Z90s that survived are now curiosities rather than desirable motorcycles, reminders of a time when Harley lost sight of what made them special. Number 7. 2019 Project LiveWire. Harley's first electric motorcycle should have been a triumph of engineering and design, showcasing the company's ability to innovate while maintaining their brand identity. Instead, it became a triumph of poor design choices and market misunderstanding. The sleek, modern styling was so far removed from traditional Harley aesthetics that riders said it looked like a grill station or kitchen appliance rather than a motorcycle. The bodywork was all smooth plastic and angular lines, completely lacking the mechanical beauty that defines Harley design. There was no visible engine, no chrome, no leather, none of the tactile elements that make Harleys emotionally appealing. The digital displays and LED lighting looked more appropriate on a Tesla than a Harley Davidson. The price tag of $29,799 made it more expensive than many traditional Harleys that actually look like Harleys. The bike alienated traditionalists without attracting enough electric vehicle enthusiasts to justify its existence. The range was limited, the charging infrastructure was inadequate, and the performance wasn't impressive enough to overcome the styling issues. The LiveWire proved that innovation without identity is just expensive confusion. Harley eventually spun off the electric bike division into a separate company, effectively admitting that the LiveWire didn't belong in the main Harley lineup. Number 6. 1977. XLCR Cafe Racer. The XLCR was Harley's attempt at a cafe racer, inspired by the custom bikes being built in Europe and California, but they created something that looked like the Terminator after a bad day at the office. The stripped-down, minimalist design removed everything that made a Harley look like a Harley. Gone were the chrome accents, the generous fenders, and the comfortable riding position that defined the brand. The black paint scheme was so stark and uniform that it looked unfinished or primer-coated. The tiny bikini fairing looked like an afterthought, and the rear-set foot pegs created an aggressive riding position that most Harley customers found uncomfortable. The solo seat and chopped rear fender gave it a harsh, utilitarian appearance that lacked any warmth or character. Traditional Harley buyers wanted chrome and curves, not this angular, utilitarian machine that looked more like a military vehicle than a recreational motorcycle. The bike featured a decent Sportster engine, but the styling was so off-putting that performance became irrelevant. Initial sales were terrible, with dealers struggling to explain to customers why they should buy this stark, uncomfortable machine instead of a traditional Sportster. Number 5. 1960 to 1965. Topper. The Topper was Harley's attempt to compete with Vespa scooters in the growing American scooter market, and it was an absolute disaster from both design and marketing perspectives. This boxy, utilitarian design was so far removed from Harley's motorcycle heritage that dealers struggled to explain why it existed. The styling was more reminiscent of a lawnmower than a motorcycle, with harsh angles and cheap-looking bodywork. The step-through design eliminated any pretense of motorcycle credibility. The automatic transmission and push-button starting were modern conveniences, but they came wrapped in a package that looked like a delivery vehicle rather than a recreational machine. The small wheels and upright seating position created proportions that looked awkward and toy-like. Riders couldn't understand why they would buy a Harley scooter when they could buy a Vespa that actually looked good and had European-style credentials. The Topper lacked the elegance and sophistication of Italian scooters, while also lacking the ruggedness and character of Harley motorcycles. It satisfied nobody and appealed to no clear market segment. Number 4. 1977 Confederate Edition. Some design decisions are merely bad, and others cross the line into offensive territory. The Confederate Edition falls squarely into the latter category, representing one of the most tone-deaf marketing decisions in Harley's history. This bike featured a controversial Confederate theme with silver paint and related imagery that alienated huge portions of Harley's customer base and potential buyers. The paint scheme included Confederate symbols and references that were inappropriate even by 1977 standards. The silver paint was applied poorly, with an uneven finish that looked cheap and amateurish. The special graphics were gaudy and tasteless, more appropriate for a novelty item than a serious motorcycle. The overall effect was both visually unappealing and socially unacceptable. Only 23 units survived, which tells you everything about how poorly it was received by the market and by history. Most examples were likely repainted or destroyed by embarrassed owners who realized they had purchased a mistake. The political controversy overshadowed any discussion of the bike's actual design merits, though there weren't many to discuss. Number 3. 2008 to 2012 XR1200. The XR1200 was designed to compete with European sport bikes, attempting to capture some of the performance motorcycle market that Harley had largely ignored. But it ended up looking like neither a sport bike nor a Harley, satisfying nobody and confusing everyone. The styling was so generic that riders compared it to an electric bike with exhaust pipes or a parts bin special. The bike lacked the chrome and presence that defines Harley Davidson motorcycles. The matte black finish looked cheap and temporary, like primer waiting for real paint. The sporty riding position and clip-on handlebars were uncomfortable for traditional Harley riders, while the performance wasn't impressive enough for sport bike enthusiasts. The suspension was too soft for serious sport riding but too harsh for touring comfort. The XR1200 spent 4 years in production limbo, never finding its intended audience despite reasonable performance and decent build quality. Sales were consistently disappointing, and most units ended up heavily discounted to move them off dealer floors. This bike proved that copying your competitors rarely leads to success, especially when you lose your own identity in the process. Number 2. 2009 Road Glide. The 2009 Road Glide was so massive and ungainly that riders nicknamed it an SUV on 2 wheels or a rolling refrigerator. Weighing in at over 800 pounds fully loaded, this touring bike had all the grace and elegance of a small truck. The engineering focused entirely on storage capacity and wind protection, completely ignoring aesthetic considerations. The proportions were completely wrong: too much weight, too much bulk, too much of everything that makes a motorcycle unwieldy. The fairing was enormous and dominated the front of the bike, making it look top-heavy and unstable. The saddlebags were huge and stuck out so far that lane splitting became impossible and parking became a geometric puzzle. The overall effect was overwhelming and intimidating rather than impressive or desirable. Riders found it difficult to maneuver at low speeds, awkward to park, and exhausting to handle in stop-and-go traffic. The bike required significant upper body strength just to wrestle it around parking lots, eliminating many potential buyers from consideration. Number 1. Triglide Highway King. And here we are at number 1, the Triglide Highway King. This recent model represents everything that can go wrong when nostalgia meets poor execution and committee-based design decisions. The white saddlebags look like they were borrowed from a different era and a different manufacturer, clashing horribly with the rest of the bike's design elements. The nostalgic design elements feel forced and artificial, like someone was trying desperately to recapture the magic of 1960s without understanding what made those bikes special in the first place. The proportions are awkward, with the touring accessories overwhelming the basic motorcycle underneath. The color scheme is jarring and uncoordinated, featuring combinations that no experienced designer would approve. Riders consistently describe it as missing the mark on retro styling, looking more like a parody of classic Harleys than a genuine tribute. Instead of looking timelessly classic, it just looks old and confused, like someone's confused memory of what Harleys used to look like. The Highway King proves that nostalgia is a powerful drug, but it requires skill and restraint to use effectively in motorcycle design. Speaking of motorcycles that manufacturers wish they could forget, you won't believe what happened when bike makers prioritized performance over safety. While these Harley models were just ugly, some motorcycles were so dangerous that governments actually banned them from the streets. Check out my video on why these 13 motorcycles got banned too dangerous to discover the bikes that were too lethal for public roads. The stories behind these banned bikes are even more shocking than the hideous designs we just covered, from death traps disguised as sport bikes to machines that literally caught fire while riding. If you think ugly motorcycles are bad, wait until you see what happens when motorcycles become weapons.